Hi, my name is Lina Sherman, and I would like to welcome you all online and the audience here to World Water Week's talk show. It's about harnessing Earth observation data to solve Africa's greatest water challenge. As everyone knows, many regions across the globe are experiencing a water crisis. In Africa, this is particularly important. According to the WHO, water scarcity affects 1 out of 3 people in the African region. Water management is vital to the future of the continent, and we are here to discuss how a new tool, Digital Earth Africa, can help. And with me on the podium, I have Walter Pansier, trustee at the Helmsley Charitable Trust, Rachel MacDonald, Deputy Director General, Research for Development at the International Water Management Institute, and Retabile Melamo, Chairperson of the Water Research Commission in South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Walter, I start with you. What is this Digital Earth Africa?
Well, Digital Earth Africa is something so amazing. First of all, it's the only thing like it in the world. It's owned by Africans. It's made for Africa. And originally, it was started by the Australian government. The Australian government spent over $200 to $300 million establishing this set of data cubes for water management in Australia using satellite data. 50, 60 years of satellite data where they orthorectify it, they fix it, and so you can see a timeline of trends. And because they spent all that money on the front end, the Helmsley Charitable Trust decided to partner with the Australian government and replicate this for the entire continent of Africa for the tune of $20 million. $10 million from the trust, and the Australian government sponsored the other remaining amount. And so what this does for all of Africa, it shows every moment in time from 1 square kilometer area, the changes from satellite imagery, so you can see what's being done. And just to preface, I know we're here to talk about water. It is World Water Week. But this tool crosses all sectors. It crosses everything. It's not just for water. It's used for migration, people migration. It's used to monitor shorelines, monitor erosions, illegal mining. It touches every sector. And not just every sector for government use, but it's open source data. That's the key to this. It is open source, so it's available for private use, private corporations, private companies, government use for planning, and also for NGOs, anybody who wants to use it. And the key takeaway on this is that it's not just for academia. It is usable on every level. So you don't have to be a PhD to use this and understand it for the government or for just use in general.
For how long have it been there? For how many years of data do you have so far?
The data goes back, like I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, close to probably 50, 60 years of data.
Wow.
Because they take all the imageries from the satellites, because there's satellites that are spinning around the Earth constantly, taking moment-in-time snapshots. And then what Digital Earth Africa did was they uploaded all that data into a supercomputer, and the supercomputer fixed everything from removing cloud cover. As we know, the continents have been drifting inches a year, so that over 60 years, so they fix all that. So it's really a moment in time. It's a moment in time story that's been able to play out in a 1 square kilometer area of every corner of Africa for 60 years of data. And that's huge when you look at planning for floods, planning for droughts, seeing normal cycles, seeing different cycles, and especially when we look at climate change and the effects on the climate over that long period of time. It's a tool for everyone in Africa.
So why did you choose to invest in this?
Well, to me, it seemed like super low-hanging fruit. We work specifically in 4 countries in Africa, but I saw this as something so valuable that this is something where, don't get me wrong, $10 million is a lot of money, but for the grand scheme of things, Australia spent close to $300 million. If we could replicate what they do in Australia for an entire continent of Africa for $20 million, it just seemed like a no-brainer type of thing. This is an automatic win for the entire continent. And it's a win for just open source. It's usable by everybody in every sector.
Rachel, so there are many user-ready applications. Which one would you say that you are most excited about?
Well, as Walter said, I mean, there are so many data layers. So what we can do is water touches so many areas that we can bring that in. Well, what we have focused on working with Helmsley Foundation, we have looked at 2 key areas. One is called water accounting, which is where for a particular 1 kilometre square through to continental scale across Africa, you can find out where the water comes from and who is using it. This is unbelievable because too often river basins we don't know. Governments don't know, investors don't know who's using which water. So this is where we can harness Earth observation data, that satellite data. We're able to use that to generate that. So a government or an investor or a business can see in this particular river basin or in this country or in this large region, where is there water, where isn't there water? Because that's really important. We want to only have development where there is water. So that's the normal conditions. But what we've also done is we've worked on droughts and floods. We know that when droughts and floods bring so much damage, and unfortunately it's increasing the amount of damage. So we're able to set up drought and flood monitoring so we can highlight to governments, to local governments, to larger, to country-based governments, but also to humanitarian organizations where there's drought and where there's flood. So where we can have the response to help people, not only to deal with the actual hazard as it is, but also to rebound, to rebuild their lives, to rebuild the farming and all of that. So building on this large data set, we're able to develop water apps that are able to then generate that data for, again, many, many different users.
Do you have any specific examples on the ground that you are especially thinking of?
Well, what we're doing is we are at the stage of verifying the data. It has to be good. We have to be able to trust it. So what we're doing is we're taking particular countries, particular case studies, and we are highlighting how this data can be used. Because with anything, this incredible resource, being able to show to government officers, government ministers, investors, private sector, NGOs, how to use it. So we're developing a series of different case studies. This is how you can do it. And the wonderful thing about Digital Earth Africa, whilst we're generating large data sets, there are other countries which we can't do at the moment. We haven't been able to generate that data. But what we have been able to do is generate something called Jupyter Notebooks, which allows the engineers, the developers in those countries to develop their own data. And that in the end is the end game, is we want developers and users in the countries to own and to be able to develop it themselves, building on this great platform of information.
Greta Bille, you work in South Africa. What is your organization's approach to the water challenge?
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. We're really excited about this tool as the Water Research Commission because our work centers around enabling various stakeholders, whether it's government, civil society, to make informed decisions using science. And one of the things that underpins that science is data. And in South Africa, data has been, there's been paucity of data, one. And the way data is collected is really disparate. Different organizations collect their own data. And in most cases, it's expensive. People have to buy data. And that's why we believe that this tool, once I think Rachel has mentioned that they are going to verify case studies, will be instrumental in gathering the necessary intelligence that policymakers need to develop appropriate policies, but also to develop infrastructure, right? As you know that Africa is the fastest growing continent. There's an estimate will be 1.2 billion by 2050. With these growing populations, there will be pressure on resources. There'll be a need for us to develop purpose infrastructure. And we can't do it without data, right? And we don't have the resources to go procure data for every plan that we need to put on the table. So really, I think what this will do is to augment the work that we do as the Water Research Commission on behalf of South Africa. But as the Water Research Commission, we don't see our role limited to the boundaries of South Africa. We see ourselves as enabling and as supporting other institutions across the continent. And I think Walter and Rachel have already mentioned that the climate change, the change in climate comes with extreme droughts and floods. And we also know that we are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change, especially as sub-Saharan Africa. And that means that if we don't plan appropriately, if we don't, our planning is not informed by credible. I think you mentioned that the data has to be verified because it has to be credible. We will not see the socio-economic development that we have the potential of achieving as the continent, but to also get to the heights that we need to get to. Yeah.
That was one example of how you can use those data. But would you have any other example where you have, if you look back, you can see that would really have helped to have the data, correct data?
Absolutely. Let me go back to the climate change and the floods example, because it's a real issue in the continent. South Africa, for instance, and I think that's probably true for other African countries, do not have meteorology data. Right, and from what I hear Walter saying, that data will be readily available. It will be open source, and I think that will really enhance our ability to have predictive tools that will enable us to have early warning systems that will make sure that we respond adequately to the disruptions that are caused by weather patterns and the climate changing patterns. So I think in terms of meteorology data, it will play a significant role, and also geological data. Just to give you an example, in South Africa, because of the paucity of data, the WRC, the Water Research Commission, had begun to work with the Weather Services South Africa. And we're going to put a submission to Cabinet to say, look, allow us to have a joint data portal that will enable us to have this early warning system. So this will really just be the catalyst that we need to do the work that is much needed. In the
Lena, if I could,
so
one of the foundation data layers that we've been generating is rainfall. Precipitation. Across Africa, we have disruptions because of conflict, because accessing something as simple as rainfall data is very difficult, or we have meteorological stations that break down or whatever. But we can fill in those gaps. We can create full layers using satellite imagery. There's a lot of data that we can have to do that. So that's just one example of how we're doing. And something like El Nino's coming at the moment. And we know that many countries in East and particularly Southern Africa are likely to be impacted. So we can look back at the last El Nino at a good scale and see what those impacts are, and then begin to think about how we can support the preparations for responding to what's going to come from. Everybody's saying it's going to be a very difficult El Nino, and we don't want to undo so much of the development, the economic development, the progress that has been made in those countries.
Walter, do you have any take on this?
Well, yes. Just saying, not just last year's El Nino or the last cycle. You have, half a century worth of data points that could help better estimate and smooth out the troughs and the ridges of weather disasters, to kind of see what's the worst it's ever been, or how the data's changed over the years. So it can provide better planning tools for the people, for businesses, for anything coming in there. When you look at what I hope to see is every country utilize this. Every country will have someone in, whether it's Department of in their agriculture or multiple people, agriculture, their water resource, urban planning. This is a tool for every aspect of human development on the continent. And that's what's so special about Digital Earth Africa.
And because it's based on technology of today, it means that the programming, it means there are these wonderful programmers in Africa that are able to take these new 2023 through programming tools and develop it for their departments, for their countries, for their river basins.
Exactly. It goes back to what I said originally. This is for Africa, operated by Africa. And it's open source data. With it being open source, it enhances transparencies across all borders, because we know in the past, water sometimes, and the lack of, has caused conflict. Well, this is an accountability tool for across all borders of Africa.
I particularly like the fact that it's for Africa. Oftentimes we get solutions that are superimposed on the continent that do not address the needs on the ground. We take a model somewhere, we try to superimpose it. But the fact that we're getting real data, decades worth of data, that is run by Africans. And I think sometimes we also feel that there are enough, there is enough capacity. Yes, we need to build more capacity in the continent. But that capacity comes and goes. And when people go, those that are managing these tools, I mean, it leaves a huge gap, and some of these become idle, and some of the tools that never get to reach their maturity or effectiveness. So I particularly like the fact that it's being pushed and driven as an African solution that will be managed by Africans, and that's what we need in this time in history.
And I think, Walter, I think it's being, so it was developed by Geosciences Australia, who did a lot of the background work. But it's now the South African National Space Agency that's the host of that. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, fantastic.
And Digital Earth Africa is coming from based out of South Africa. But there are directors, 5 key African directors, who are mobilizing not only the science, but also the engagement and the networking, raising the awareness of what are the possibilities of this very exciting tool.
Yeah. And I'm really excited. I mean, I worked with, I happened to be neighbors with the South African office a couple of years ago, and I didn't understand the extent of the fantastic work that they're doing. So really excited and looking forward to working with them more closely.
Absolutely.
Have you got any proposals from other African countries that are excited about this?
Well, we have seen this actually work in other African countries. I'm going to divert from water, but Ghana has used this to prosecute illegal mining claims and has recovered tens of millions of dollars, if not more, off of illegal mining. Wow. This is just one example, but we've seen countless countries get excited about the water use on it, to better manage their water systems, to better manage their water resources, both above ground and below ground, to use this as a predictor of how to better handle the growth that Africa's seen and will continue to see. As you said, they continue to grow over the next decade, and it's all about management and management of resources and doing it well, so we don't have more horrible droughts. We don't have people dying from scarcity of water. If we can predict where water is and where historically it's been over years, it's going to save millions of lives.
And one of the things that we've heard in probably every session here at Stockholm Water Week is water's here, water's there, it touches that. It isn't. There isn't just a thing. So water and mining is really important. Water and nature-based solutions. So there's some of the work that's doing is mapping wetlands. We know they're very critical for not only ecosystem services, but also for ameliorating droughts and floods. And water is, because we're able to bring in information from many different sectors, as you were saying, we know that this is going to be particularly critical for water management.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Do you have any thoughts that you would like to, final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience here?
Maybe just to say that data is important, but how it is packaged for different needs, for different sector, is going to be important. So I think getting this data will enable us to get the necessary insights. And I particularly liked the keynote address yesterday, where it was, I think, it was very clear that Data is gathering and collecting of data is the first step, right? It's then what you do with that data, the insights that you get from that data. And once you have the insights, it also enables you to forecast, all right? So I think it's not an additional thing to say per se. It's a reiteration of the importance of that forecasting to meet the various needs and to be more resilient as the continent against climate change, but to enable us to develop. I think when you are in a continent where 40% of the young people do not have access to job opportunities, and that is hindered by the availability of water resources, energy resources. I particularly like the fact that, you know, the tool enables, it probably can help with the solar and the wind. I don't know the extent, maybe that's where it is. So it can map up where our resources are and how to use our resources more effectively. Because as a continent, we need to prioritize growing it. We need to prioritize maximizing the resources that we have. And this will catalyze that. We don't have to spend public resources to try and get the data. It's already there. We're going to use what's already there to make very informed policies and then make sure that we then implement and monitor more effectively. And the fact that it's dynamic, right? We're able to see that, okay, you may have your plans, how do you tweak them to adapt them to the need at the time? Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. And I thank you online, the audience online. And now, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter.